Second on the grid, 13th into turn 1, 6th out of turn 2, first at the checkered flag. It was a very memorable Phillip Island win for Marc Marquez as part of really strong form as of late. Simon, what does it tell us for 2025?
I mean, I think it tells us that Marc Marquez is going to be MotoGP World Champion next year because he looks so strong right now. At certain points of the season, let's not pretend that he's strong all the time, but definitely at certain points this year, he's been so strong on a bike that's a year old, that's been actually downgraded from what it was even a few races ago. That's not as competitive, that doesn't work as well with the new Michelin rear tire that they brought for this year because it's not designed for it. There's a lot of factors that are limiting Marc Marquez's performance right now that are not related to Marc Marquez in particular. They're more general Ducati things. The people that I speak to that are inside the camp that see what's going on say, oh, the GP24 is worth 0.4 a lap. If you give Marc Marquez 0.4 a lap right now, no one's going to see him. So for me, I can't see how we go into next year without him looking like he's going to not run away with it, because it's never going to be that easy, but like he's going to be considerably faster than he is this year and right back into a title fight.
Zero point 0.4 a lap, that is a crazy number, because I think the big question of this season, genuinely, surprisingly maybe in a way, but maybe not, is the real difference between the GP24 and the GP23, and that's something that it feels like everybody's had an opinion on. We've heard reigning champion Pecco Bagnaia sound off on it a bunch of times, and he has tended very much to downplay the difference. The GP23 riders who are not Marquez have grown increasingly vocal in talking about what they perceive as quite a significant difference. And 0.4 is obviously, that's massive, that's huge if it is true. I know which side of this you stand on, but can you just talk us through, if there is a chasm, why that chasm is there?
I mean, it fundamentally comes from the fact that we've got a bike right now that's built to use a tire that doesn't exist anymore. And everything in MotoGP is so sensitive right now, as we know, that if you change something fundamental, then you're gonna have problems. And this is the first year in a long time that we've seen Ducati start the season and the new bike be faster than the old bike, because traditionally in the first opening races of the year, it's been the older machine that, until the new bike finds its feet, has been, winning races in the hands of Enea Bastianini in the past few years, in the hands of Marco Bezzecchi last year, Bastianini the year before. It's been really, really quick. That didn't happen this year at all for any of the GP23s, and there's 4 of them in the grid with 4 riders who are all absolutely capable of winning races on their day. It hasn't worked. You have to look at why, and it's obviously that rear tire. It has less grip. They're able to use the rear tire less as a result of that mechanical grip that's missing, not just the grip generated by the tire, but the grip that the bike generates from the tire isn't there. I mean, they're slower out of corners, they're slower into corners. It's all coming from that point. It's fairly fundamental and it's fairly obvious. And we know that Ducati have done some things this year to try and mitigate it that haven't worked, or that they've had to revert on, which shows that they're thinking the same thing as well, right? Because it's, whenever they're trying to come up with solutions to the problem, it's pretty obvious where the problem is. But none of it's worked. The gulf is there. And I think that what we're seeing from Marc Marquez is him being Marc Marquez again for the first time since the halfway through the opening race of 2020, where he's able to overcome the limitations of the bike through sheer natural talent. But it's not good enough to be a title contender right now.
Now, statistically, if the Ducati GP23 was the only thing on offer, it still very obviously would have been good enough to win the Constructors' title and a whole bunch of other titles, obviously. And if you look at it year on year and you just look at the results, you might not see as much of a change in a gap, if you just look at the point standings. But the thing is, of course, that the GP23 roster, compared to the year-old roster from last year, has swapped out Luca Marini for Marc Marquez. And, we love Luca, with all due respect to him. He is not Marc Marquez right now. Simon, there's another factor going into 2025, and it's that Marc is part of Gresini. Do you think if he had a GP24 at Gresini this season, that would have been enough for him to fight for the title?
Yeah, I do. I think that he has a team within Gresini who, despite a few issues this year, here and there with mechanicals or maybe getting strategy a little bit wrong, I think that the team are more than capable of it. At the end of the day, his crew chief, Frankie Carcetti has won a world championship before with Joan Mir. He knows how to win championships. And, even some of the mechanical problems, some of the technical issues we've seen this year with Marc Marquez at Gresini have come from the fact that he's an 8-year-old bike. He should have won at the Circuit of the Americas in Texas earlier this year, but he had an issue that it turned out stemmed from the fact that they were running an older brake system that wasn't as basically capable of coping with the massive amount of force that Marc Marquez can generate on braking. We saw an engine failure at Mandalika that it turned out was something that Ducati were trying to do to mitigate the previous problem, nothing at all to do with the team. And there's no reason why that even as someone that constantly jokes that satellite bikes can't win championships, there's no reason why I don't think that a GP24 with the difference, with the margin it has over the GP23 wouldn't have been enough to tip Marc Marquez into championship contention form this year, even with the process of having to adapt to the bike at the start of the year. Because if you look at where he is right now and could kind of extrapolate the performance he's delivering on occasion right now to the whole second half of the season, and then look at the points gap to Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, he'd be right there, I think.
I mean, I gotta say that, in my book, only one guy was winning at COTA this year, issue or no issue, and it was not Marc Marquez. However, and this is sort of interesting to talk about. We obviously, there's a lot of respect for what Marc is doing right now, but it's not been a perfect season. I went into this video project thinking that we're going to talk about Marc's issues in qualifying, and I sort of looked at the statistics compared to the other GP23 riders, and I realized, honestly, he is still beating them pretty hard. He's still a better than average qualifier at the very least, but do you think he is missing a little bit of a step there? And could that be an issue next year? Or is it just the bike spec question?
I think the thing that's missing in qualifying, at least early on in the year, was his ability to adapt. It was the fact that it took time to learn how to ride a Ducati for one lap, which is totally different from both riding a Ducati for 25 laps and for riding a Honda for one lap. He's admitted multiple times that some of the errors we're seeing are coming from him having to adopt his riding style and how that process isn't completed yet. But I think the advantage he has in his back pocket at all times is that he's Marc Marquez, and he can work magic on opening laps of races the way that no one else seemingly can right now. Like he demonstrated at the weekend at Phillip Island, like he demonstrated in Mandalika. He can do things that no one else can, so it doesn't have to be as important to be qualifying in the front row whenever you're still third at the end of the first lap anyway.
I mean, at Phillip Island, he just kind of got people to move out of the way. He almost admitted he didn't really have to do anything, but it's funny how that does seem to just keep happening to Marc. I think when we talk about 2025 title favorites, we talk about a Ducati rider, so that excludes everyone but 6 names, and out of those 6, I think for 4 of them, even their parents wouldn't really call them 2025 title favorites. That leaves 2, that leaves Marc, and that leaves 2-time world champion Pecco Bagnaia currently fighting for his 3rd title. If we're saying Marc is the 2025 favorite, even though Bagnaia has been fighting for the title every time at Works Ducati, are we being a bit disrespectful to maybe the dominant MotoGP rider of this era, or at least the defining MotoGP rider of this era?
I mean, there's an argument to be made that a dominant rider wouldn't be fighting for the title into the last round every weekend the way that or every season the way that Pecco Bagnaia has. He's not been dominant. He's been winning championships, but he hasn't done it in a dominant fashion. He hasn't done it in a Marc Marquez 2019 incredibly consistent every weekend way. He's done it by hard fights against Jorge Martin, against Fabio Quartararo. It's not been plain sailing for him. And, even with his successes, he's a double world champion. Marc Marquez beats him to that number by a factor of 3. He's a 6-time world champion. He's the one that's regarded as a game changer for MotoGP. He's the one whose style changed the way this championship works, how people rode bikes, everything. Bagnaia, for all of his many strengths, hasn't been one of those guys. He's not been someone that has evolved the whole sport. And I think whenever you take those factors into consideration, for me, it still has to be Marquez that's the favourite for next season. I don't think that even Bagnaia would particularly argue with that. But I think that, there is an opportunity for Bagnaia to elevate all of the championships he's already won if he can come along and beat his new teammate Marc Marquez in equal machinery, because then, you know what, that argument changes, and you have to consider everything that Bagnaia has done the last few years in a completely different way.
If Bagnaia does get it done next year, he does become one of those guys you're talking about, doesn't he?
I mean, it changes everything. It changes the whole context of his other titles. It probably elevates Jorge Martin as well, because he's the guy that's kept him honest over those seasons. But, that's got to be the attitude he's going into this season with, as the person who wants to beat Marc Marquez to prove everything he's done. Don't think it's going to be that easy, though.